Hello, and I'm so glad that you are part of the conversation that we are going to have today. I just want to take a moment and introduce who's talking to you. My name is Bill Lamori, and I am with,
Shalith Gary.
and let me give you another level of introduction. I am the lead pastor of a church called Calvary Fellowship in West Hartford, Connecticut, and we're celebrating our 15-year anniversary this week, which praise God for that. And we are a church that we're so thankful that we've seen God grow us in multi-ethnicity, and it is our desire to be a truly multicultural church where people know they're welcome from all walks of life, all different ethnicities, and not just that they can gather, but that they can feel accepted, approved, validated, and a part of what we're doing. And so and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're doing here today. But before we go on, Jalee, tell us a little bit more about you and your role at Calvary.
Sure. So I am an assistant worship leader here at Calvary Fellowship. I've been going to Calvary since April 2012. So I have been growing for the past 8+ years now. And yeah, Pastor Bill is a very good friend of mine. I consider him family. And, this conversation is an opportunity for us to just demonstrate, our relationship as lived out through some of the things that we've been learning together through the Bible and also through Dr. Anderson's book. I know I'm stealing some of your
You steal away.
stuff. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to serving in this capacity and just sharing with you all.
Thank you. So, also, who you can't see is Crystal Hall, our communications director, who's not on screen, but she's behind the scenes serving as our host and moderator. Not between us, we're not debating, we're having a conversation, but just in terms of if you have questions, comments that aren't being answered, she can make sure that that's being addressed. And I do want to say what our hope and desire is to have a healthy
Mm-hmm.
conversation like we normally do. This is a place where we can get into some difficult things and some things we may not always agree, but we're going to do so respectfully. And if you're joining in, I want to make sure that this is not going to be, if there's anything posted on there that's, hey, we're going to drop this political thing or this and that, that'll probably be removed, just so you know, because we want to, the title of what we're doing is Race and Redemption. And so let me tell you a little bit about that. That was a series we did a number of years ago, and it was trying to have these conversations and get our church through. As you said, we were going through the great Dr. Anderson's book, Gracism, and we were having Sunday services. But the idea was to foster healthy conversations. And I don't know about you, but as I look at my social media feed, it's off the wall sometimes. Like, and I get it because people are hurting, people
Mm-hmm.
are upset, and we don't always process our emotions in the most tempered way, and sometimes we look back and maybe regret how we process certain things, or maybe we needed to say it but it's not the totality of kind of where we land or where we feel. So we want to acknowledge that, but what we're trying to do here is demonstrate the conversations and have these things, and then let it lead to redemptive actions and steps that we can take from here. So here's what I would say to you: if you're not a Christian, I hope you find value in this
Mm-hmm.
conversation today, but we'll only be able to take you part of the way because we're going to land on Jesus. There's a lot of places you can go and just have political conversation about these things, but we want to address difficult things head on through that.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure to get to that. But can you give us just a little bit more context? How did we get to this conversation? Can you tell more about the PBJ show,
Yes.
what that is, and why you pitched that?
Yes. So we are complete opposites in many ways, right? And yet we still have a really great relationship, I think, that has grown, since I got to Calvary. Like I said, I've been here for 8 years. Um, and it's been an intentional, growth on both of our parts to just invest in our relationship with each other. Um, that has given us the privilege and opportunity, and sometimes the hard work of having really, really tough conversations. We trust each other. We're able to confide in one another, and that can be rare to have that dynamic with someone so different from you in this day and age. Um, but it is something that you have to be committed to doing. And then once you've succeeded in building or fostering and cultivating a relationship like that, it begs the question, well, what do you do with it? Is it a self-serving relationship, or can you use that in some way for God's kingdom? And when we went through the Race and Redemption series with Dr. Anderson's book, I realized, how precious this relationship is, because I was given opportunities to have many, many relationships that did not pan out. And I just felt convicted that, we need to be able to do something beyond, just the two of us and our immediate families, for God's kingdom. And so I said to Pastor Bill, I was like, I call him PB. He calls me J. We should have a show called PB and J. It's sweet and salty. We could talk about the good and the bad, and just have, an opportunity to model healthy conversations about really tough things. He and I will know that we're speaking to one another in love, and that, we wish neither one of us any harm, and we can trust that about each other. And so, we have the margin to have those types of conversations. So, obviously, with recent events and a lot of the unspeakable atrocities against Black people in this country, there's a lot of pain. There are a lot of questions still. And there's a lot of desire to have conversation. Granted, some of us are like, we've been trying to have the conversation. But some people may not know how to have that conversation. And so I would like to use my experiences in having those kinds of conversations, not just with Pastor Bill, but with other people, to help you all have better conversations about difficult things.
I appreciate that, and appreciate the relationship that this is formed out of. I wanted to share that with you, to think that this, when we all saw the murder of George Floyd, and just watched the aftermath of that, we were all shocked. We were all angry, upset about that, and I think everyone agreed on that. But that's about where the agreement broke down for most, like with all different types, and so of people and backgrounds and experiences. And so what we wanted to do, and by the way, when I talked to Juliet, then I said, maybe it's time to start that, what we had talked about, and do that now, because we need to have these conversations. But in honesty, one of the things you shared with me is like, there's a lot of pressure for one person. Like you said, hey, I don't, Black people aren't monolithic like white people. We don't all think the same, act the same, right? And so there was a pressure, like, well, I can't represent. I'm not like, I had a friend who, his 5-year-old kid was a big brute of a kid, and he declared one day on the playground, "I'm the king of the white people." And it's, we don't have a king, you don't have a king. Like, we're all people, and we don't represent. But what we wanted to do is give space for these. So just know, the reason we started this is a series of conversations is we don't think in one conversation we're going to fix everything or address every issue. So we're going to start today, and this is going to be, for now, a weekly series, and we're going to have different people on, because as we've talked about these issues, I've talked to some people on our staff that grew up with Mexican background, Puerto Rican ethnicity, and they've shared some of the pains. I've talked to some people, some Asian folks in our church that have talked about what it's been like for them. I have a police officer neighbor talked about what the experience has been like for them. Like, hey, everyone liked us because of COVID until 2 weeks ago. Now everyone hates us. What's that like for them? I have a neighbor right next to them who's an Asian family, and she had Chinese lamps that were out front, really cool, and she took them down because she was afraid of what everyone was gonna. So what I'm saying is, pain runs deep, it runs across the board, and so there's going to need to be a series of conversations that, again, we're going to talk about race, which we know more technically would probably be ethnicity than race, but doesn't alliterate like race and redemption. So that's what the conversations we're going to have. So let's talk about today. Now, what we're going to do is, Jalith and I were in a training, and we're going to take some of the top things that we learn from that. Now, you have no idea what we're going to talk about today, but the thing is, either do we. We don't know, because Jalith and I went to the same thing, but we didn't discuss what's going to come up. So I don't know what she's going to say, and she doesn't know what.
Look at my notes.
We don't know what each other are going to say. So we're having this conversation in in a real way with you guys. But can you give a quick synopsis of the training we went to, and then we'll get right into it?
Sure. So, Pastor Bill is part of a coaching network led by Liquid Church, and they had a session today called Bridging Racial Barriers in Leadership Development, and they featured guest Dr. David Ireland, who is the lead pastor at One Christ Church, and also the author of I forgot his book. We'll post it in the comments.
He's got a bunch of them. We'll
He's
post
got a
it on there
bunch
for
of
you
books,
guys.
but he just gave a few really insightful pointers and coaching tips for us, and challenged us really to think about, you know, the racial injustices and the opportunities for redemption in today's age. So,
Awesome. Well, that said, I want to let you lead it off. Why don't you and what we've agreed is we're going to take maybe the top 2 to 3 things depending on what time.
I'm trying to get to 3.
She's trying to get to 3. All right, I'll make space for you. And then we're going to talk about these things. We'll have a little bit of back and forth. But also, if there's comments or questions, you guys go ahead and jump into the conversation with us. We want you to participate in there, and we can kind of do this dialogue together. And then we'll wrap up at the end. And I know some of you guys tune in and tune out. We'll aim to end, no later than 5. And it may end before that. So, having said that, Jalith, kick it off. What's the first thing that you want to bring up after what we heard today?
All right, get ready. So, there was an opportunity for people to ask questions, and I don't remember this brother's name, but he asked the question about reckoning. And a lot of times we want to get to the reconciliation part without addressing or acknowledging, and I'm using we collectively, so I'm not accusing us or anything, but I'm just saying in general, without really giving due time for processing and really like assessing the trauma that happens when you are navigating a racialized world as a targeted person. And so, he was like, yeah, so like, how do we get to reckoning and acknowledgement? And Dr. Ireland, at first, I wasn't really feeling his answer. I'm just going to be honest, but I appreciated it. He was saying, there are going to be times when things are going to be uncomfortable for both parties. And it reminded me of a conversation that you and I had. Again, just trying to use, experiences that we've had to share with others, how to have these healthy conversations about paper cuts. And I had forgotten about paper cuts and my willingness to get paper cuts. But in short, the idea is, or the concept that I want to relay is that when you are decidedly going to be part of a community that is not homogenous and does not look like you everywhere, right? Then you are bound to encounter some uncomfortable situations. And for some of us, those are beyond discomforts. They're deep hurts, they're pains. And I liken them to paper cuts because they can be like really small things, like not remembering your name for 3 months, even though you've been going faithfully every week. Or
Yeah, sorry.
No. It's a conversation.
No, I was just saying. So when you're talking about like you show up at a church, for example,
Yeah.
and they don't remember your
and
name,
they just keep reintroducing themselves to you. I won't say that happened to me, but
I remembered your name.
But he remembered my name. And actually, that brings me to another thing, but I'll say that at the end when we have time. And I just remember thinking, like, how could you not remember me? We had a whole 5-hour conversation in the caf, we shared a bagel, but I had to keep coming back, right? I had to set aside that particular experience to give the opportunity, because I was just very attracted to the sermons. I appreciated Pastor Bill. I appreciated, other aspects of Calvary, and I didn't want that to cause me not to have the experience that I was looking for in a church. I really felt called to be here, and I could have been very like, this ain't for me, which part of me wanted to do, but then the other part of me was like, no, You can get over that. They will learn your name. You will teach them your name, and everybody knows. Everybody knows it now, for better or for worse. But um, there will be paper cuts. And right now, at in this time of crisis, there's a lot of there are more paper cuts actually. People want to help, but sometimes instead of helping, they're really like burdening black people right now with like a lot of guilt and a lot of questions like, well, what can I do? And it's like, you can Google what to do now. But there's just, which is more paper cuts. And it's not like we don't want to be friends, right? Like we want to maintain these relationships, but this is a time that hurts to have to, keep teaching the same things or keep crying out the same cries. And I started drawing this diagram because the other thing, this is not the second point, so I'm just cheating a little bit. But
Good.
the other thing that he imparted was just about self care. And I was like, there is a lot of time that we need to dedicate to self care, and a lot of time we need to dedicate to work. So if you can look at this sandwich of a time of crisis, some breathing space, which we'll call normal, but there's still a lot of trauma that happens in that norm. So I don't want to dismiss that. And then another time of crisis, because like these shootings and unjust killings are not new, even, right? Like they've happened before. So there's like times when they're not as salient in our media, that someone like me might have more margin for these kinds of conversations, and so would be able to have, you know, some of those paper cut like conversations. In the times of crisis, though, what I would need my allies to do and my friends to do is to say, all right, I'm going to do the work without burdening my friend, and I'm going to just care for my friend. You know, I had posted, sorry, I know I'm going on very long. I had posted, check on your black friends because we're not okay. And all you had to do is say, hey, are you okay? I know it's a hard time. And that's it. Um, and that's all you have to do in those crisis times. And maybe advocate and do some other stuff. But the short of it is that we're trying to survive, right? So there's times of crisis where we're still trying to survive and we can't pick up any extra stuff. And then there's those times where there's not a lot of crisis and we're able to engage in, some of the paper cut conversations.
I think you made a couple great points there. One is the idea of paper cuts. It's not just because every in life everyone gets with people. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just you forget even homogenous groups you get injured along the way with
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
but with paper cuts, it's the specific application. And I think because people say, well, is it really that bad? But what happens is it taps into wounds that are already there over a lifetime of experience, and then
Mm-hmm.
just over. It's kind of like you fill a cup a little bit, a little bit. At some point, it overflows, and
Yeah.
I don't know if that's saying it correctly, but I think of that in those ways. And so those little things that you might think, oh, in and of itself, it's not a big deal, and maybe that little incident in of it itself isn't, but over time it compounds and it feels
Mm-hmm.
that way. And I think one of the things you said that was super interesting, is great, is like for people to say, hey, uh, what can I do, and thinking through that lens. And I think what I have heard from you and what I've heard from a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my black friends is, I just need to know right now. I just need, are you okay? How can I pray for you? Or even, don't even make you answer that. I'm praying for you.
Mm-hmm.
I love you. And it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing when I've sent just some text to certain people that I'm connected to, how much that has meaning. Whereas we might not think, oh, what impact does that have? But our words are life giving.
Right.
And what I'm hearing from you is, right now it can be life draining. And what I'm also, when I got out of that is, in some ways, we're looking to you for guidance, but what you really need is some care. Like
Mm-hmm.
basically, and one of the things I'm going to get to is, you need someone to care for your soul. You need a
Mm-hmm.
comforter right now,
Mm-hmm.
and to put you in a role where it's something else could be challenging. And I know everyone's different and in different
Yeah.
places, but I think that's super helpful, and I'm glad you brought that up. Anything else on that before? And I don't see any questions so far, but did you have anything else that you want to talk about, sort of on that point?
Um, One, I want to say thank you to the people who did do that. You being one of them. Pastor Bill was one of the first people to reach out to me to say, "Hey, I see what's going on. I know it's horrible. I will never be able to walk in your shoes. But I just want you to know that I love you. I care for you. I'm praying for you, and I'm here if you need anything." And I literally cried because I didn't even know that I needed that. I'm very self sufficient. I like to be able to do things for and by myself. I'm also an outgoing introvert. There's a kicker. So I'm very like just by myself. Um, I don't like to be vulnerable. Um, and so I would never have admitted that I even needed that. But in seeing how that helped me and comforted me, I was like, my friends need this. And so that's why I posted that status. So I think, yeah, you're right. And then in terms of the paper cuts, yeah, it's not just, you know, one paper cut. That's why I use the analogy of a paper cut or the metaphor of a paper cut, because when you get multiple in one instance, right?
It's like death by a thousand cuts.
Right, yeah. Right. So it really is very much like that. Try washing your hands with a paper cut.
Or don't, and just imagine.
No, wash them. COVID-19.
All right. Good point. So one of the things I'm going to bring up is this idea. Dr. Ireland reminded us about how Paul advocated for his congregation. And sort of a lesson for us to learn across is that we must affirm and validate different people groups. And if you remember, in the book of Acts, the gospel was spreading. Paul was a Jewish man. Peter was a Jewish man. Paul was the pastor of the church in Antioch. It's a growing multicultural church with Gentiles, which are non-Jewish people that were gathered there. And as they began to gather and as they began to have fellowship together, Peter came and saw, and he participated and began building relationships with these non-Jews, being a Jewish man, and had no problem. But then when other Jews came and looked down at Peter because he had cultural prejudices, and by the way, we all have some that we need to discover at some way, shape, or form, and looking at what that looks like and deal with that. But Scripture says that Paul confronted Peter because he was out of line with the gospel. By the way, prejudice, racism are out of line with the gospel, right? As a Christian person, out of line. So that's super clear. So if it wasn't clear before, it's out of line with the gospel. And so Paul confronted Peter, and like Dr. Ireland says, I always keep saying Anderson.
I know,
because it's too many and they start with David too, so it's also even more confusing. So yes, Dr. Ireland, what he said is that Paul confronted Peter. And sometimes we need to confront things. And the reason he did is he advocated for his congregation because they were brand new to this Christian deal. And all of a sudden they were experiencing this prejudice from this church leader. And Paul respected Peter in a lot of ways and looked up to him perhaps, had been around with Jesus, unlike Paul during the whole time of Jesus' early ministry. But he stood up to his face and said, "This is wrong, you're out of line," and advocated for his congregation and church. And you must affirm and validate different people groups. He was a Jew affirming non-Jews. And I think as we look at different people groups, the experience that I shared of my neighbors or people on our staff or people in our church, it's a difficult thing. And like I said, I can't ever fully understand. For those of you that may not be able to tell, I am a white middle-aged man. Right? Jalith is a younger female African American. So there's distinction in there, and I'm not ever going to see things exactly the way you see them, nor is that going to be. And by the way, that's a good thing. Yeah. I think a church that is multicultural, I love one of the things he said, I'm going to sneak one in kind of like you did. A multicultural church is not a melting pot.
Oh, I loved this one.
It's a tossed salad.
It is.
Right? I need to be able to see the mushrooms, the carrots, and all the different pieces. Your distinctions are valid and don't need to be. And an effort for anybody that feels like I've got to lose my blackness or my whiteness or brownness or whatever, you'd be doing the body a disservice, because the vision of the New Testament is a multicolored tapestry of God's people. The Old Testament centered around one nation in God's story. The New Testament is God's story through a group of people. And so having said that, for that to work though, we have to care about the other parts. We have to stand out and then care about. And just as a again, as a white person, I do not and cannot fully understand all the pain that you've been through. And I mean, I can comprehend certain things,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't with the same degree that you feel. And yet I have to advocate for you and
Mm-hmm.
figure out what that looks like as not only a pastor but as a brother in Christ. And I'd say that for all of us, and I'd say for my black friends to advocate. You know what, I had an African American pastor speak to another person in our church, and I found out he was talking behind my back, standing up for me, speaking up
Oh.
for me. No, good. Don't worry, it's a good thing. I'm saying, so as Christians, we need to advocate for one another. And here's what I know that is. You mentioned different ways. You shared different ideas of whether that looked like showing up for a protest, speaking at this. Here's some other that's probably another topic, because, and
Yeah.
by the way, you guys can put topic ideas. We're not going to cover everything in one conversation. We got some good stuff coming up with conversations. For
Yeah.
example, um, we I had a conversation with a young African American woman in our church. Why does the phrase Black Lives Matter so much? Like, why that specific phrase? And I understand not the qualifier all
Mm-hmm.
lives matter, but
Yep. Yep.
why is
Yep.
that phrase important? What do we talk about with privilege, and what's the role in that, and what does that look like? How do we stand up for people? And so again, what I want to say to you guys is, we're not approaching this with politics. We are an apolitical church. That means we are not going to endorse political parties, positions, and so forth. But that doesn't mean we get to use it as a shield to avoid difficult issues, because if we untangle it from politics and say it's out of line with the gospel,
Talk about it.
so that's something, whether you're left or right, that's secondary or third. Your primary identity needs to be in Christ. So we need to be able to have these conversations, and your politics shouldn't define it. I'm going off cue a little bit, but big picture, Paul advocated for his congregation, and people that look different for him. And I think we all need to do that. We must affirm and validate different people groups. And sometimes that's all it is. And I want to say this, in an infographic on Facebook, you're not always going to get that across. Conversations like this need to be nuanced,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to have back and forth and push and shove, hopefully not shove, but you know what I mean. We got to go back and forth
Push
a little
and
bit,
push.
push and push, that kind of a thing. Yeah. But any feedback on that, thoughts or that, or we can.
I did see some stuff happening in the comments, but yes, and this is kind of, you may hear a lot of your black friends saying things, or just anyone who's marginalized saying something like, I need allies, I need advocates, I need co-conspirators. That is exactly what Pastor Bill is talking about, and it's taking your opportunity, your place of privilege, and using it to help somebody else who is at a significant disadvantage, who's not being treated fairly. So yeah, I would say that was right on point, and I appreciated that. I also saw in some of the comments, we do have Crystal moderating, but we can see some of the comments too. And Sarah had a question about, um, she says, is it true that saying, quote, how are you feeling? Is it true that this is not helpful at this time? And also saying no need to respond is not helpful. Um, so asking how are you feeling, I think that's going to depend on the proximity of the relationship that you have with that person, and also how many other people are asking them. I know I've been super backlogged, with text messages. Normally, I get back to people within an hour or two, same day at the latest. But I've been, 48 hours, 72 hours behind. And some I can't even find because the blue dot is gone.
Now you could just text them a link to this video. Just watch. If you really
Watch
want to
the
know,
video.
watch this and leave me alone.
Appreciate you. I'm hanging in there. So it depends. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming, and it has less to do with you personally and more to do with just that person's context. So, it might be better to say, hey, just wanted to see how you're doing. I hope you're okay. Please let me know if you need anything. Um, no need to respond is a helpful qualifier, because it takes a lot of the burden and guilt off of us to feel like we need to come up with something to say that doesn't make you feel bad, or doesn't, like, at least for me personally, so this is me not speaking for all Black people again, doesn't make me like just vent, because it doesn't it doesn't do anything. And I see that Jason shared some of his insights too. Hi to all of my friends on here, by the way.
All right, so thank you for that. Let's go to the what do you got next?
Identity. So, you know, he brought up the point of whether or not we are ethnocentric or Christocentric. And I had to wrestle with this because I am both simultaneously. Yes, race is a social construct. Yes, my skin color does not necessarily really dictate anything about me except that I got melanin. But what it does is influence how I'm able to navigate the spaces I'm in, regardless of where I am. And so, while I know whose I am and who I am and have my identity rooted in Christ, it is not necessarily separate for me that I am like a Christian and then a Black person, especially since I was, you can't be born Christian, right? Like, um, but what I took away from that was, it is a luxurious experience to be able to say, I'm identifying as a Christian first, and then I'm going to choose how else I identify. However, it does have applications, again, for self care for marginalized people. So, point one is, do not believe the lies that society tells you about yourself and about people like you, and teach your children the same, right? Um, we're made in his image, right? And then also to just be rooted and grounded in him, right? Because, I was, sharing with Pastor Bill earlier, because one of my breakout session comments or questions revealed to him, just because he's gotten to know me so well, even though I was like, I'm keeping it totally composed, cool as a cucumber, he was like, you looked like you were experiencing pain. And I was like, wow, I feel so seen. I feel so exposed. But yes, I am in pain, and I was in pain when I was saying that, because my question was about, how, when do we take a break, right? When is it okay to say, I can't do this now? And I was just honest. Like, I feel like I've been running for a really long time, and in that moment when I was asking that question, I also just had this epiphany that I didn't know when the race was going to end, and I didn't know, how much longer or how much further I'd have to run. And I'm tired. I'm sore. My soul is sore. Um, I again, we talk all the time. I had said to PB, oh, hey, like, I feel like I'm just trying to justify my humanity over and over and over again, you know? Um, and so there's really only one place that I can go to find strength. Um, and that's God. And I know, um, that for someone who doesn't believe, that is not even a practical solution for you right now. But for me, it just further affirms that there is like validity and truth in the gospel, because we all are made in his image. So if that's you, comment and I will talk to you one on one. Probably on
But it's going
camera.
to take a while to get back to you because she's got a backlog.
Oh,
Looking out for you.
what? He used to have to tell people no for me.
I helped Jalith by telling her no, but she's learning to get better at
I'm
that
trying,
advocating for you. We
I'm
got to watch out for you. So
trying.
I appreciated that point about, am I going to be, do you have something more to say?
I have so much more.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Okay.
no, you go ahead.
that I do need to make a disclaimer though. I'm not policing how you respond to, the trauma that you're experiencing. So don't take it that way. Jesus flipped tables. He was mad when people disrespected things. So that's not what I'm saying. So that was for marginalized people. And for privileged people, and maybe I can just say white people because we're talking about race, right? Okay. Um, you know, Micah 6:8. I'm seeing a lot of scriptures being posted. Cool. This is good to share, truths that are parallel to the things that um, need to happen, right? So, but we also need to. Sorry, I'm talking at the camera, not talking. But we also need to just put some action to the words, right? So, we talk about Micah 6:8, seek justice. What is justice, right? Um, then we also have, Matthew 25, whatever is done to the least of these, right? Then we also have, 1 John 4. Um, you can't say that you love God and then hate your brother, right? Even if you can have conversations that help people to examine their cognitive dissonances about these things, that's work, right? That's work that, yes, I could do, but it's just better for you to do it because somebody will see themselves in you and be able to identify with you and empathize with you, right? Because at the core of this, at the core of like hatred and racism and things like that is a lack of empathy, right? And a lack of seeing people as humans. And so like they don't even respect my opinion. So this is really an opportunity for you to say, hey, no, that is my sister, right? You can't treat her like that. You can't treat people who look like her like that just because they look like her. And they'll receive that from you better than they'll receive it from me.
All right. Well, that's a lot to process, and I appreciate you getting real with this and just sharing your heart and being vulnerable. So thank you. With that, the idea of am I going to be Christ centric versus ethnocentric? I think there's a couple sides of this.
Yep.
One is first of all, you have to choose. It says in Ephesians, Colossians that in Christ we are one. In race, gender, class, those distinctions are secondary things. Your primary identity lens should be through Jesus, and that's hard, and that takes a lifetime of prayer and getting in the scriptures and choosing. That's how I'm going to see it, because we are new creations in Christ.
Every
and,
day.
and that's how. And when we look at these issues, if we're a Christian, then that's how we have to start. That said, what it doesn't mean, back to the idea of mixed salad, not a melting pot, is you can still be conscious of your ethnicity. You can still be proud of your, like, hey, I'm not ashamed, for you. I mean, if I say well, I'm not ashamed to be a black woman, that'd be weird, but you know what I mean. It's like,
I'm not ashamed to be a black woman.
Right.
We what?
Right. So we can recognize, right? We don't pretend we're colorblind, like, oh,
that's awesome.
you're
Don't
black.
do that.
I never knew. It's of course we know, and so that's maybe another talk for another day.
Yeah.
I know you got some.
Write that down.
You got some content, but I think the idea is recognize Christ identity first, and if you get that wrong, it'll be wrong every single time. Because if I start with I'm a white middle-aged man, and that's the way I'm going to interpret the events that happen around me and process people, then I'm going to do you a disservice and shortchange you in some ways, and I'm not going to be helpful and redemptive in a lot of ways. But then we do get to, of course, we acknowledge who we are and whose skin we are, and recognize God made you that way. God decided you should be born, and in whatever flavor you come in, that's how you should be. And so that's a good and healthy thing to embrace and embody. And I just wanted to say that, because sometimes when we look at ethnocentric versus Christ-centric, I think you only get, I love what he said, you only get one center. That center has to be Jesus, or you're going to get it wrong. But that doesn't mean we don't recognize the other things that make us us.
Right.
Go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Was that your second?
Oh, wait a minute. Was that my? No, that was your
No, I'm
second.
just making sure.
That was your second.
Just
I was
keep it.
bouncing off of your ethnocentric
Okay,
versus
okay, okay,
Christ-centric. I'm
okay.
gonna go to my second, and I probably will only do two. I'm gonna let you do three. Is here was a big one for me. He said to ask yourself, and I want you to ask yourself this question, but I asked it, it hit me hard, is how do I come across? How am I being interpreted? Not like, oh, there's not a racist bone in my body. I'm not like, oh, it's, I have good things. Like, not how you think you come across or present, but how do I come across to other people? And I just want to just kind of share my heart a little bit
Mm-hmm.
here. My vision and my heart for Calvary Fellowship, the church that I get to the privilege of pastoring, is that we are a place where Jesus is exalted. People of every different walk of life can walk in and say, I'm valued here, I belong here, I'm affirmed here. They don't put up with me, they're glad that I'm here. And so, what I want to say is, for as a pastor, I want that to be that experience. But in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, I've got to tell you, I shut up on social media more than I talked. I might have said a couple things, but I did that intentionally because I saw there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, and I also saw some people responding to that in defensiveness or like I've got to speak up and I've got to address this situation. By the way, I'm going to train you. You don't have to respond to every post that people write on Facebook, even if it gets. You could just scroll down,
Mm-hmm.
scroll down. It's a good feature. But anyway, my point is the question I have to ask and you have to ask is how am I coming across? And I knew that by me not posting a lot of stuff, then that was coming across a
Mm-hmm.
certain way and that
Mm-hmm.
that's interpreted you don't care, don't whatever. And I guess what I would say to anyone that is hurt or upset by that, understand I'm processing and trying to understand the events around me. And I know you can't see when I reach out to my friends and talk to the people that I know and care in
Mm-hmm.
that way. But as a pastor, we want to have these conversations and we want it to lead to the actions that lead to change, to healing, and to hope. But it's a question that I have to ask myself and you have to ask yourself, because you talked about paper cuts. And you know what? You and I have to have another. I don't. I'm not bold enough to do this one right now and say what are the paper cuts that I've given you. Oof. So we'll talk about that another day, privately, maybe. But
Okay.
but we won't. Oh, it's that long. All right.
No, I
So
just have to now think about it.
all right, all right. But in you, in what way are you coming across and presenting in a different way? And I think that we have to think through that lens because as Christ followers, we are we are and we have to consider not just who we are,
Mm-hmm.
but are we presenting ourselves in a way that is in line with the gospel? Again, we talked
Mm-hmm.
about being out of line and racism out of line with the
Mm-hmm.
gospel. Are we presenting ourselves in that way? And am I coming across as someone that cares, is empathetic, is safe? And it's really hard, by the way. I get that. Listen, in a lot of ways, um, and particularly speaking as a pastor here, I've talked to a lot of other pastors of different ethnicities, and it's really, really hard to address a lot of issues. Here's the thing I would say too about churches. If your church is homogenous, predominant, if it's like pretty much, hey, we're all black, we're all white, we're all Hispanic, or have all one left opinion or right opinion, it's easier to address these issues because you've
Mm-hmm.
got an echo chamber. But if you are willing and if you want to have a group of people that you love that are different, like I believe the New Testament calls us to, then you're going to step into some risk, and you have to be willing to do that. But you do have to ask, how am I coming across? How am I being interpreted? And kind of one of the things Dr. Ireland says, even saying to people, I may not understand how you feel, but I'm going to sit with you in your pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a good thing that I would say to people, that if you are part of our church, especially, I don't understand entirely how you. I can certainly understand to a certain point, but I do want to sit with you in your pain and sit with you in your pain. But again, how am I coming across? Because some people, instead of coming across as
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand exactly how you feel, but I want to sit with you in your pain, or coming across instead, oh yeah, well you posted an angry thing about this and that, and then all of a sudden I'm in a defensive posture, and then you're like getting even more upset because you're already upset and hurt to begin with, and then it's come across this way. So before I just keep going on and on
Mm-hmm.
how I like to do, that was something that was thought provoking to me and something to continue to process.
Yeah. This for me goes back to identity because I am outraged, to say the least. And that's my responsible way to say it, right? And as somebody who has a lot of what I'll call stage time or like prominence or something in our church, and who's Facebook friends with a lot of people in our church, and whom a lot of people know, um, it sometimes is hard to find a balance between my authenticity and my responsibilities or my felt responsibilities. Um, and this is like in isolation of any kinds of parameters that have been put around me or anything like that. Like Pastor Bill has not said, Jalith, you can't talk about anything or anything like that. But this is just me trying to, be responsible because as a worship leader, the last thing I want to do is create a barrier between, God and somebody's heart um, over my feelings, even when they're valid.
Hmm.
At the same time, I am also being irresponsible if I'm not speaking truth that is gospel centered, right? Um, so yeah, I take a great amount of concern with how I'm being interpreted, and not to. Uh, there's just such a parallel right now. Um, so I'm gonna maybe take this conversation a little different direction for a minute, but this is like a burden that Black people experience every day. How am I being interpreted?
Hmm.
How am I coming across? You know, um, if you can just for a second think about how it felt when you wanted to say something but you didn't know what to say.
Hmm.
Now, multiply that infinitely, and that's how it feels to just walk around. Like yesterday I was at Sam's Club with my mother. This woman is like fun and awful to go shopping with. I love you, Mom.
Bye,
But
princess.
she's everywhere in the store. I don't know how she does it, but she is literally everywhere in the store. She will tell me to pick up something that's literally 2 feet away, and by the time I get back to where the cart was supposed to be, she's gone, and I have to now call her to find out where she is. And so I have like this really big bag. I don't know what kind of bag it is. It's just a tote. It's a double tote, and I'm carrying something maybe that size. Can you show them your mug, please? Two of those. It's body wash, and it's at Sam's Club, so it's all big and it comes in two. But that could have very easily fit in my bag. And I'm very aware of this. I'm holding it distanced from my bag. And this white man is following me around the store. And in that moment, I was like, how am I coming across? I'm super bubbly, happy go lucky, but I'm also just shopping and I'm tired and I want to find my mom. I'm mad she's not where I thought she was going to be. So, that was just a double entendre question for me.
Oh,
How
that's
am I
good.
coming across as a Christian leader, and also how am I coming across as a person who is just like criminalized in her existence? So
And let me say something to us white people right now. As you hear that, it's heartbreaking that you would even have to think like that. And I don't have to think like that, or certainly if anyone's acting like that, I wouldn't immediately assume it's because what I look like or whatever. And you might argue, well, you shouldn't have to think like that or this and that. But that's not our experience. So I don't think we get to argue. But again, the idea is I may not understand your experience,
mm-hmm.
but can I sit with you in your pain and say that's wrong? I'm sorry you had to feel like I know your character, so I know you would never steal whatever items that were in there, even if you didn't think you were going to get caught, or if there wasn't a white guy following you around the store.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us that don't experience that, that's something for us to look on and say, wow, that's wrong. And I may not be able to fix that, but I can acknowledge that's wrong and join you in that moment of pain. So I think we're running low on time. I want to give you. I will skip my last thought, and I want to let you kind of introduce the last thought that we kind of got out of today's
Sure,
time.
sure. And it's for me, it was just when you're entering into these conversations having the same goal.
Hmm.
I feel old now compared to my younger self, right? When I had all the zeal in the world to just have all of these conversations and I was going to change everybody's minds because it was really just a matter of them understanding the logic model and that there was flawed, right?
You sound like a man.
Listen,
I get in trouble for
listen.
that.
I, hey, I just paid the price. I was like very taxed, okay? And I also had to learn through experience that not everybody is coming to the table with the same goal for the conversation. You need to have a spirit of discernment, um, of wisdom when you're entering into these conversations. There's a lot of, I don't want to say noise, but there are lots of posts and conversations about how, you know, people are getting cut off and all these things. I'm not telling you not to cut certain people off because some of that can be very unhealthy, and that has happened to me before. You were privy to this. It was very, very bad. Um, but sometimes conversations are not for that person at that time. I had to share this with one of my sisters yesterday, Carla. I hope you see this. I love you. Um, there was somebody, a well meaning white woman, who reached out to her, shared an article with her that was basically like scolding her for having feelings about anything that was happening right now. I know that that's hard to fathom, but it is something that happens to us a lot. And, you know, she was struggling with how she was coming across as a Christian leader. She's also a worship leader, but also just a Christian who's mature and likes to disciple women and you know, live out what she's called to do. And, you know, not wanting to perpetuate any stereotypes. Um, but, you know, she has a friend who's an ally, who's a white woman, who is very educated about the matter and has done a lot of work on herself to learn how to, you know, have certain kinds of conversations with white people. And I had to say to her, that's not your work. That's just not your work because that person is not coming to the table trying to reconcile. And you have to be able to discern reconciliation from, you know, self righteousness.
Well, I think it's key. One of the things I wrote down on that
Mm-hmm.
topic that he said is when you're having these conversations, don't seek to be right, seek to be reconciled. And I think that's a big part of our
Mm-hmm.
problem is when you and I sat, I never sat like, all right, today's the day I'm finally going to get Jalit to come on my side of this argument, right? Where it was like I came with a spirit of I'm going to learn from you, and maybe we're going to learn from each other, but we're going to have a conversation. And even if we walk away and the needle hasn't moved in either direction, I still love you, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm wiser and better off for the experience. And hopefully, we're reconciled more relationally, and our thought processes may have changed or moved because of that. And I think that's important for all of
Mm-hmm.
us as we have these conversations. Don't seek to be right, do seek to be reconciled. Now, that's a lot in there, and again, it brings up what because some of you even say, "Well, why are we having conversations? Why aren't we out doing stuff?" I'm not saying we're not. You know, like it starts with conversation before you start. You know, Amos 3:3, can two walk together unless they be agreed? First, you got to kind of think of having some conversations, and we'll talk about
Mm-hmm.
steps as we continue on this conversation. But sometimes we go wrong because we're just seeking to get right. We're just seeking to maybe promote a certain agenda, but instead, as followers of Jesus, one of our big things is how do we become reconciled in this place? And you're right, if we can't, and your initial comment was, how do we come to this table with the same goal in mind? And I think as
Mm-hmm.
Christians, that should definitely be the case. So I'm going to say a final thought, and then but I want to give you an opportunity when you say, so this is race and redemption, so we're going to kind of try to land each week with sort of a redemptive thought that we could say or do. So in a minute or so, what would you say is, as we could just keep going, but we were not going to, but we got more weeks for this. And by the way, this is going to be weekly for now. We're going to have a series and different people on here that are speaking about it. So a couple things. One, I hope you continue checking it out and continue having the dialogue. And why not share this on your Facebook feed? It's going to be on YouTube at least by tomorrow, so you can always watch it there, or you can go back on Facebook if you kind of tuned in and watch part of it. But wrapping up, What do you think, out of kind of what we've talked about so far today, what's one redemptive thing, thought, action that you'd like to leave with people?
Redemption. Um, well, what I had written in preparation for this, just, wanting to leave people with something, um, some hope, is that we have a lot of models for what to do, right? Like, we don't have to go to the drawing board, um, and, reinvent the wheel. Um, but we can look to scripture if if you're Christian. We can look to scripture for guidance and for action steps. And so that's like the biblical perspective of it, right? Like, look to Jesus. He did all of the things right. Then, in the spirit of Calvary's practicality, because that was one of the other reasons why I was like, this is where I'm going to be. Um, the internets. There's just so you can literally Google, things like what can white people do to help fight racism, and there are I've seen so many Google Docs and articles with just all these practical things, and there are some that are for Christians too. So like, if you're scared that something is going to be way too political, you can also just put Christian in the query, and you'll come up with some different action steps there too. And then I have to also say, like, wrestle with the concept of anger, right? Like, not all anger is bad.
Mm. Yeah, righteous anger versus sort of unrighteous anger, or be angry but sin not in your anger. There's a distinction.
Right. And Abba actually wrote a really, really good article on that. So
awesome. Well, maybe that's something we
put that in the
we're gonna have to get him on for one of these too. So, Abba, by the way, we got some work for you too. If you're willing.
If you have margin.
If you have margin. Thank you for that. I appreciate those thoughts, and I think that's helpful. Here's what I would want to say. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." And what I want to say is, this is a time where the African American community is mourning.
Mm-hmm.
There's deep pain and there's anger. But always remember that anger is a manifestation of hurt. So there's a lot of hurt, and that's expressed in a lot of anger sometimes and in different ways. But the Bible doesn't say logically appeal to people who are mourning. It doesn't say reason mourners out of it and into seeing things your way. It doesn't say any of the talk. It doesn't say talk people out of mourning. I'm just trying to keep
a straight face, because it's like, no, it doesn't.
Right? You can say that. It says mourn with those who mourn. So even if you don't fully understand the scope of mourning, and like, why why are people so upset? And we get that awful incident was awful, but right, we're getting to see it's a broader picture. You don't have to understand it all to say, I'm going to mourn with those who mourn, and figuring out what that looks like. First of all, it's a heart issue, and then maybe from there it is a, how do I express that externally? So I'm going to leave it right there today. We are about ready to wrap up. This is the kickoff of our Race and Redemption sort of series. We're looking to do weekly conversations, and then we'll see where that leads from here. And I hope that you're going to come back and participate in this and be a part of the conversation. I know we didn't get to all the questions and comments, but if you feel like, oh, I wish they had talked about this topic, or I'm curious about this, go ahead and write it in the comments, because that's the whole reason we're going to keep doing it, is to take pressure off, so it's not just on one person in one conversation, because we can't fit it all in. We need breathing room. And like I said, we're starting with black and white on purpose, because we all know that's the biggest racial divide in our country right now. But there are others, and then we'll have to talk about those too. But we're starting at the tension point, and I think that is the place to start. But my Asian American friends, Hispanic American, I mean, there's so many other things that we can talk about, and that we'll get to as we go through that, and we'll pull people in. But I just want to say thank you so much for checking us out today, Jalik. Thanks for being a part of this and making yourself so vulnerable. We look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you. Thanks for watching us.
Thanks so much, you guys. I'm also going to be checking out the comments, right? So we're going to probably close the video, but I'll be able to check the comments. I see you, Samantha. I'm glad we were able to answer some of your questions. You're welcome, Sarah. Love you and miss you. Kelly, you can rewatch this. Julie, equity versus equality. It's another topic.
All right, we got topics.
All right.
So I think what we'll do is Jaleeth is scrolling through the topics as we look right now. I think we're going to close this out, and you can Jaleeth will be on there interacting with you guys, so you can stick around if you guys want to talk some more. Thank you guys so much.